Hi, my name is Steve Rahi. I am a premier field engineer specializing in system center technologies. Today's discussion will be a continuing session in our series dealing with operating system deployment. Today's session is part 9 of an ongoing session and dealing with specifically user state migration, right, in ConfigMgr. So while ConfigMgr is our ultimate goal, putting this together, figured it would be good to kind of back away from ConfigMgr for a session and talk about USMT specifically as it works standalone, right? If we understand how standalone works, then we can take that knowledge and use it in ConfigMgr and make our imaging scenarios even richer, potentially, right? So we'll have this session, which is focused on USMT standalone, and then the next session will be talking about USMT and ConfigMgr from the ConfigMgr perspective, right? So it is true to say that we could just talk about ConfigMgr and USMT because USMT is fairly easy to implement in imaging in a task sequence without knowledge of how USMT works. But again, if you do know that, we have more flexibility. And this is a great example of what we said when we started this series. OSD really brings automation to what you could do manually, right? There's so many pieces of this, image deployment, driver injection, all of those kinds of things that you could do manually. But if we allow OSD to do it and really know how those processes work, we can make the imaging process even richer. And USMT is certainly a great example of that. So here is the agenda that I want to go through. We want to start talking about what is USMT, talk about USMT standalone, some pieces of that, how we customize it, deal with some USMT usage scenarios, and then wrap up briefly talking about where we're going with ConfigMgr and OSD, and we'll end up from there, right? So in terms of what is USMT, USMT stands for User State Migration Tool, right? This is a tool that is specifically designed to allow administrators to preserve the user settings and all sorts of associated items, as you'll see in a minute, for that user or set of users on a machine and migrate them to a new operating system. So that could be migrating to a re-image of an existing piece of hardware. It could be scraping the user settings and such from one piece of hardware and providing another piece of hardware as a replacement and reloading on top of that so that at the end of the day the user doesn't really know that there's any difference, right? That's, if we do USMT right, if we do user state migration right, that's the end result, right? So like everything that we have in imaging, there are version specific requirements. USMT comes with the wake or the ADK, and versions up every time we release a new version of that, right? So this chart, there's actually USMT 2 that I could have added here, but I didn't because it supports operating systems that really no one uses anymore, not supported any longer. USMT 3, notice we have a source and we have a destination column under each version of USMT. The source will be the version of operating system that we can use to pull user data from. The destination is what versions of operating systems we can then restore that to with this version of tool. So as you can tell, in this one, Windows 2000 Pro is not supported for restore, but we can definitely pull the data off of it and restore to XP or Vista. What is the purpose of all of these tools? Again, to help organizations migrate forward, rolling new operating systems more easily. USMT 4 supports XPSP3 as its base operating system where we pull data from, but you can't restore to XP. And USMT 5, the current version that's out, will support pulling data from XP, but you can only restore to Vista. I think I might have had, Vista 7 and 8.1, right? I'm not sure. I have to check Vista. I don't know if that's right anymore. I might have put that in and it was wrong. Anyway, very fully documented on the web, and you'll see some of those in a minute. Now, so if we do go forward with USMT, what can we migrate by default? And the answer is quite a bit. In fact, there are folks that are quite satisfied with just the default options that USMT provides. But like anything, we can customize, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But in terms of what you can do by default, we can migrate user accounts. You can have control over those. You might choose to only migrate domain accounts or exclude certain user accounts that are local or whatever it is, right? You have flexibility, but we can migrate those things. We can migrate files and folders, right? So I think of, for a user account, there's the My Documents folder, there's the My Pictures folder, the My Videos folder, the My Music folder. All of those things, files and folders, we can migrate. You see the photos, music, and videos below. We can migrate those things. Email messages, settings, and contacts, we can do that. Windows settings, so the background, maybe the desktop that you might have customized, we can migrate those settings over. Certainly migrate some program data, files, and settings. There's a default set of programs and associated files that we can migrate. You can add others if you need to. Internet settings, internet favorites, and so on. We can migrate those over as well. So we'll look more at what we migrate by default in a little bit, but that's a decent list of general items to start with, right? Okay, so in fact, let me. I'm gonna pull in one of my lab systems. So I've set up a system that I will show you more in a minute whenever we do some migration work, but I've set up this system to be ready to migrate so that we can see it work live, right? So I'm logged on as my administrator account. It's necessary to do that as to run USMT as an administrator, but I have a user here called lab admin, and under that user I've got my documents. I'll put a couple of folders in here, a few files, right? Under my music folder I've got a song there. Under my pictures I've got a photo there, and so on. Things that we would grab and migrate, right, are there. There's also, I changed the background, but whenever I went ahead and captured this ahead of doing the recording, I had a high contrast background. So whenever we actually do the migration and then restore, because I captured the migration file earlier for the restore, you'll see it restore back to the high contrast background, right? So, all right, let's pull that back out. We'll come back to it in a minute. So what about imaging options whenever we're using USMT? I would have called this scenarios, but I have a scenario section in a bit. So what are the imaging options? There's two broad categories of imaging options we think about. One is a reimage. The other is bare metal. So the question is, well, knowing the definition of USMT, I think it makes total sense that in a reimage scenario where we're taking an existing OS and trying to capture the data off of it and then either re-imaging that system and then restoring the information to it or replacing it with new hardware, those are re-image scenarios kind of loosely, right? The first one for sure, they both are, really. That makes total sense that we would use USMT there. But what about the other general category, bare metal, right? In that scenario, we don't have an operating system on the machine at all. So is there any reason that we would care about user state, either capturing or restoring? And the answer is, yes, we would in terms of both capturing and restoring. So let me explain. If you have a true bare metal scenario where you don't have any pre-existing user you're trying to preserve, you don't care about user state. There's no reason to. But if you're specifically in that replacement scenario where you have an existing machine, you want to take that data and migrate it to a new piece of hardware that you're putting on that desktop, then you absolutely do. You have to capture the user data with scan state first, then you can reload it onto the new hardware with load state, right? You can certainly do that manually. I'll show you how you can use those tools manually in just a minute. You can do that in ConfigMgr too, through a task sequence, whatever. There are provisions or there are ways that you can set that up, right? In MDT, they have specific coverages for those kinds of scenarios. In OSD, we can build those out, no problem. All right, so think through that. Now, in terms of now that we understand what it is, in terms of the components, in terms of using USMT standalone, what that is, let's start with the components, right? So as mentioned, USMT is a component of the Wake or ADK, as we've named it for the later versions. There are a few components. There is this tool called scan state that will go and pull all of the user data off according to the definition of what you've asked us to do. And then there's load state, which will take that stored data and put it back in place on the machine where we're trying to load it back. The question oftentimes comes, how do we know what specifically to migrate? What do we know? How do we know what data to get? The answer comes in the form of these migration files, the migapp, the migdocs, the migusers. These files define rules that govern what data to try to pull off. Right? For example, migapp will have rules that define application settings and what we can migrate there. Right? Migdocs is rules that will help migrate documents, user documents, and miguser are rules that help migrate user profiles, user data. Right? There is the ability to do custom migration. We'll save discussion of that for a little bit later in this session. Let's look though just at what the default migration files help us migrate, right? Because again, many people have used just the default and it works just perfectly well for them, right? So let's pull in the lab. We'll walk through a couple of these demos first. Okay. So first of all, I want to show you the USMT tools. So they are part of the ADK in my lab. So let's just go to the system where I pulled them off of. So this is one of my site servers. Site server requires the ADK of a specific version to be installed. In this case, the Windows 8.1 ADK. And if I go to program files, you'll see Windows kits. Let's scroll down. And under Windows kits, we have the 8.1 folder. And here is the ADK. Assessment and Deployment Kit. Here's the user state migration folder, and that is what I just simply copied over here. So if I go into the user state migration folder, I will see some of these control files that I was talking about, 64-bit, x86, and if I scroll down, you'll see, for example, load state. There's an exe. You'll see scan state, that exe, right? And then you'll see migapp and migdocs and miguser, the XML control files. Okay, so the question is, what actually do these files contain? What's the detail? Right. Well, to look at these, I'm just going to go ahead and open them up in. I was going to open up a Notepad. Actually, let me pause. I'm going to get a tool that I thought was on the desktop and open it up because it's actually better to look at these files with, I think. So I'm going to pause, grab that tool, and I'll be right back. Okay, got it. So there's a neat little utility called Notepad 2. That helps us, I think, better visualize some of these XML files. So I'll just pull them in one at a time. So here's migapp. Open it with Notepad 2. Right? So here it is. Now, we can walk through. We can see all these definitions, and we'll talk about a couple, right? But remember, migapp is for rules to migrate application settings specifically. Okay? Before we get there, though, it's helpful to maybe have a 2-minute discussion about how XML is built, the structure of it, and that kind of thing. If you've never worked with XML, this could be a very confusing blob of information for you. But if you're going to get into the details of understanding these files, knowing what they mean, that kind of thing, at least understanding the structure of the XML can be helpful to know how things group together and so on. So let's spend a couple of minutes. So every, let's just take a couple of the elements here. So the, we'll start here, the section. Here is the header of a section. You'll notice the indentions, just like we would do in code. If you're building code in a way that hopefully other people can understand it, you're going to indent. It's very common practice just to make it more readable. We do the same in XML. So we have, for example, this section which starts the definition of an environment that we want to describe, right? So every section that starts also has to end. And the end you can see down here. The way I know that's the end is because of the preceding slash telling me that's closing this discussion. Now, it's nice when it's indented like this. Even if it's not, you can know how these sections are supposed to line up and know that a section starts with an opening definition and closes with a slash. And though it's more difficult to trace it when it's all strung together, if you know that, you can, right? You can actually go and edit it and make it more readable if you want to. So within this, for this environment, we have to define conditions. The conditions is another section that begins here. Here's the definition for it, and it closes here, right? Here's a variable within this. Here's the definition, what it's going to be called. Here's the data for it, and here's the section closing, and so on. So we know, just looking in this little section, that it's this whole block that defines this environment named global env x64. A global x64 environment has to have certain attributes. So this right here is basically MigXML helper is basically some internal libraries that we use to drive this process, right? Some like DLLs and such. But here we're specifically saying a 64-bit environment has to have this registry key, has to have this program files x86, has to have this, right? So we know what it is. Here we have global environment and what those kinds of things are. We're going to have HQ local machine software. We're going to have a program files variable and so on, right? And we can scroll on down with that knowledge and just look through these sections and find out what's going on. Remember, this is defining settings that we want to migrate from applications. So as we scroll down, we're going to see, for example, Adobe, right? This is not just Microsoft applications, it's third parties as well. And what it means to migrate that. We're trying to pull settings. Here's where those settings will be stored. Here's some other information about those settings and file versions and such, right, that go into it. And as we scroll down, we'll see other things. We'll certainly see definitions for Word and Access and Excel. So you probably don't want to get into the minutia of this. You might, but at least you can tell what we're trying to migrate and handle out of the box, right? And if your application is not here, you can add it, certainly. We'll talk about the customization in a minute. But you can tell what we're here doing by default. So MigDocs will pull in and look. So this one's a little bit briefer, right? Because it's just defining what documents we're going to manage or we're going to migrate. And here is again one of those script helpers, one of those internal functions that help define what patterns to get and so on. So this is the XML helper, ignore irrelevant links and different things we're doing. Here's some good detail about what this is actually doing, right? But we can read through it now that we know the XML section and kind of put it together and so on. So that's the document. So this is the section that helps migrate user documents. And then finally, MIG user. So if we open that up, then again, we have the details, the rules associated with user profiles. So we can see what we're going to pull. So my video and common video and my music and all of those things that are defined by this that we can scroll down, right? So I won't go any more detail in those. You can if you'd like. The one thing I would just underscore here, you'll probably hear me say it again later, don't change these. These are the default control files. You don't need to change these. If you need to customize things, there's ways to do that. We'll talk about that in a minute. Okay. There is good documentation for this, so instead of just trying to detail all of this, I'll point you to some really good documentation. So if we go to our browser here, let me pull this down. I'll just go to the browser on this system. And I'll paste in the URL. So this is the URL. I'll pause for a minute so anyone who's interested can see it. And then I'll go to this page. Right, there it is. So what does USMT migrate? A full definition, all the document types, all the operating system components in general, all of these things, right? So it's very well defined what we migrate. Okay. So let's pull back out of this for a minute. All right, good enough. Now, so now that we know what we migrate, now that we know the control files and how we do some of that, right? Let's actually look at this thing in action, right? So as we look at this, there are some important command line switches. So the way you control USMT, like many DOS-based commands, is through command line options, right? And there are certainly some key ones for load state, for scan state, right? So let me show you those. I'm also going to show you scan state in a couple of different scenarios, and I'm also going to show you kind of a debugging trick that's useful for this. So let's pull the lab back in and just walk through all of that. So first of all, let's get back to the right machine. There we are. Okay, so let's open the command prompt. And you do need to run this as administrator, so I am in as administrator. I'm going to change to my desktop, user profile, AMD64. Right, so if I simply run scan state with a /? It'll list out all of the command line options. So let's run through a couple of these key ones, and you'll see the rest of them in here too. Right? So it's kind of starting top down. Certainly you're going to have the store path. You'll see that. That's the place where the migration store is either created or restored from. Here's the /o option. Very common to use this. What it simply means is overwrite any existing store in that location, right? Whenever you're doing a state capture. We have the encrypt option. So this one is a really useful one. Think of the migration store as basically a treasure chest of data about that user. Anything that user has customized, documents they have, whatever, it's there. So if we don't protect that, then anyone who gets a hold of it can restore it and have that user's environment, right? So we want to be very careful with it. Part of being careful is to encrypt it. In ConfigMgr, again, preview forward, we do encrypt this by default. Okay, you should too, and I'll show you how to do it with encryption, without encryption here in just a minute. All right, what other do we have? So if we scroll down, we see one called hard linking. So this is an ability added in recent versions of USMT, which allows you to basically carve out a place on the local disk if you're storing the state store locally that cannot be overwritten, that's linked in a way that helps protect the integrity of that data. Now, certainly you could always have a hard drive crash, right? You could have things like that. Having it on the local hard drive is no guarantee. Putting it on a network share is probably safer, where you can back it up and have more protection, but that's one of the things hard linking allows you to do. As we scroll down, there's another one in here. Did I miss it? Where did it go? Oh, verbosity level. So this is going to be pivotal when I demonstrate the debugging. This tells you how verbose you want the tracking to be in the logging. Here's where you specify the logging file, right? As we go down, let's see. So this will tell us what migration files we want to use and can call out, and so on. The MIG app, the MIG user, and so on, right? Here is the VSC. So this one's interesting. So what you will see sometimes if you just run USMT as it is that there are conflicts. There are certain files that are locked. And USMT can't access them to preserve. Well, if you use VSC, that's going to enable the volume shadow service to grab that data anyway and put it into the migration store. It's really a good thing, right? So there's some details to know about it. Certainly test all of this for sure, but those are the options. Now, again, just a reminder, we're going through this so we understand what we can do with USMT. ConfigMgr will do a lot of this behind the scenes for you. You may not want the options that ConfigMgr puts on you. So if you know these options, you can augment what ConfigMgr does, or if you don't like what we do, you can just simply eliminate the USMT built-in steps and build your own, right? Nothing wrong with that. Okay, so let's actually go through and capture user state. Let's do it very simply first, and then we'll do it in a couple of ways. So the first thing, just to show you, there is no information on my local hard drive. Right? This is where I'm going to create it, so I'll kind of pull this off to the side. So we'll see it. And then we'll run scan state. And this is that system where I have a few things already tucked away. So I'm going to run scan state with the path to the user store. So I'm going to call it USMT store. And then /o to override, even though there's not one there. /l for logging. I'm going to call it scan state log. /i for MIG user, /i for MIG docs, /i to include MIG app, right? And then /c. So /c simply says if you run into a problem, just don't worry about it. Just go ahead and go forward in case it's some sort of fatal thing that you just can't, right? So I want to run that, and off we go. Oops, what did I do? Might have had something wrong. Let's look at that again. Scan state. See USMT store /o/l /i/i/i. That looks okay. Maybe I'll just copy it in. Maybe I made a typo I just didn't see. Let me try that. Here we go. I'll try pasting it, see if that works any better. Apparently, I got too much. Oh, there we go. So it must have been a typo. So we're creating some things. You see the scan state log created here. You'll see USMT store or whatever it is. Yeah, USMT store created shortly. As we go through, we'll just watch it for a minute, let it run. So here we go. Here's the USMT store. In there we have the USMT folder, which will be pivotal in a minute. And here's the migration store. So we'll just let this run, right? And it's going to go through and check all the user accounts in the system, discover what we need to migrate, and so on. And we'll just let it run here and watch it. Should be just about done. One more thing to pass through this computer, and then we'll be done. And we'll have a migration store, right, that we can then take and restore onto another system. Another couple of seconds. And we're done, right? So, well, 1%, but it'll be done. There we go. So we have it, right? So we can take that migration store. Notice that I have some errors here. If I would have used the /VSC switch, I would not have any errors, because the errors that you will see are because files were locked, right? So let's just open this up. Now, I can use Notepad. I can use trace. It's very common for a ConfigMgr admin to do, but look at all this red and yellow, and it's kind of alarming to look at some of that. It's really not something that is a big deal, and it might be a little bit confusing to read this. So in this case, I like to actually open it in Notepad. So if I look at this and then want to scroll down and look at the results of this run, it creates a nice little grid here that says what error code was encountered, whether it caused an abort, how many times it was encountered, and what that problem was and where it was found. So we found a read error because of Windows Defender over here. Right? Now, if I would have used the volume shadow service, it specifically will get around those kinds of things. We'll still be able to grab files even though they're locked. Right? So no big deal here. We've got the store. It's good to go. Now, I'm going to go ahead and delete the store because I want to run this a different way. So that store was created, no encryption at all. Well, what if I want to encrypt it? Well, same command line. I just run this, except now at the end, I'm going to use /encrypt. Right? And now if I'm going to encrypt something, I have to provide a key. So you have the option to manually type in the key or have the key in a file. Right? So I'm just going to use a key that probably you wouldn't use in production, test keys, just a string of data. That's fine. In ConfigMgr, as an example, we protect our state migration stores when we're using our state migration point, and everyone has a unique key that we store in the database. So we'll just use this for now. So I'll go ahead and run it, and now we're going to get the same thing done, same process, right? Except this time it's going to be encrypted and protected, and that's frankly the way we should run it in production, whether we're letting ConfigMgr do it or not, right? And then I will show you when this gets done. I'm going to run this one more time, and I'm going to use the /VSC switch just to show you that with that we capture everything without any errors at all. So we'll let this finish up. Almost done. And go ahead and copy that to my clipboard. Actually, I don't have to. It's just one more little command line. So as soon as we finish up. And I won't wait on the VSC one to finish, just to show it. Yeah, actually I will. All right, hurry it up. Now, what I'm going to try to do once I have this done, I'm going to go ahead and run load state, but I'm going to do it without the encryption key. So let's get that done. Actually, let me grab this from my clipboard and run this. So I'm going to try to use the existing migration store on my system. Here's load state. Now notice I don't have any encryption key at all. I'm just going to try to run that. Okay, and oops. And it starts, and then it's got a problem because we don't have, oh, wait a minute. Let's see. Make sure I have it right. So USMT store is my base path. If it fails, I want it to fail the right way. There we go. Run that. Okay. Starting the migration. And we should fail. We should not be able to proceed here. Right. And we did. Right. So encrypted data, encryption key is not specified. We're done. So we're good there. Now let's run this state migration again, or this create the store again. But this time let's use the volume shadow service. So there is scan state, that's what we want, and I'm going to use /VSC. So volume shadow service to create this. It'll take just a second, and then we'll look at the log and see what the difference is. I'm going to pause this while it's working, and then I'll come back when it's done. All right, and we succeeded. Well, notice this time, success code 0. We didn't have a problem. So if we go into this scan state log and open it with Notepad and go to the bottom, we're going to see no errors, completed successfully. Why? Because those files that were locked and we could not get to with USMT before, now we can because we're using volume shadow, right? Okay. So now that we've got that capture, we've seen USMTs capture the data a couple of different ways. Let's go restore it. Okay, so to do that, what I'm going to do is reset this machine to a state where we don't have any of this data and then go restore it. So let me do that and I'll be right back. Okay, so I've reset my machine. I'm going to go ahead and log back in as administrator. And we're ready. So you can see here's my USMT folder. I've got my state store there from a previous capture. If I look under users, I mentioned I have some data under lab admin on the system that I just captured. Well, if I look here under my documents, it's blank. If I look here under my music, it's blank. And if I look here under my pictures, it's blank, right? So you saw a second ago before I reset it that the default background I had changed, and so we'll see if that migrates across. So let's go ahead and run this. I'm going to go ahead and open the command prompt. And run load state. So load state C:\\. Now, let me talk about that for a minute. You would expect it maybe to be C:\USMT. So let me save you some time. We need to make sure the USMT folder is in the path specified. So if I specified C:\USMT, it would fail, even though that's where the migration store is, because we expect a folder named USMT. That's why I'm putting that there, right? So then I'm going to do logging C:\load state .log, the same migration files. And that's it, right? I'm going to have a /c just in case, and off we go. We're going to, oops, what did I do? Again, probably a typo. Load state C:\. Oh, there we go. So I put SML. Took me a minute to find it. Off we go. So we're loading now, and at the end of the day, we should be able to go into the My Documents folder, as an example, under my user account, and see that we're restoring data. So let's just go in there and park here. It won't be in there yet, but very shortly you'll actually see these two items get restored because I haven't deleted them. Actually, I'll just go and delete them now, just proactively. You should see them come back. As a result of this, you should see those folders get created to indicate the restore. And then we will sign out and see if the background has changed. Let it process along here. Okay, so very shortly we should see these. As soon as it gets to the lab admin account, we should see those start to pop in here. Not yet. I think it's the next one. And by the way, this is, notice, a local account, so we're handling that too. Now we're on lab admin. Let's see if this pops in here in just a second. There they are. So those just popped in. We'll let this thing finish up, and then we'll re-sign in. All right, so we're done. Now I'm just going to go ahead and sign off of this, and because the background didn't change, and then sign back in. Sign out. Let's connect again. There we go. I'm going to do it as administrator. And we should, in theory, have a different background this time after we reset. I can tell we did. The color just changed there. So there we go. Yeah, so we have the high contrast background here as well. Right. Now, let's go back to the desktop, and I'm going to clear this background because it's easier to read. Notice the procmon and such came back. I'm going to clear the background to Windows again and be back to it. Now, there's one other thing I want to show you. So as we do this, you could get unexpected results. You could have to troubleshoot. You're definitely going to need to test this as you do it to make sure you have the results you want. There's a neat little way that you can actually kind of shortcut, a neat little way that you can get in here and troubleshoot and see the full progress of the migration. So there's an environment variable that we can set called mig enable diag, or enable diag, not diag, and set it to a path. So I'm just going to call it c:\\USMT diag.xml. Right? Good enough. And I'm going to hit set just to make sure that took. Okay, hang on. Where is it? I'm looking right past it, aren't I? Yeah, right there it is. Okay, I'm staring right past it. So it's there. And now what I'm going to do is run the same user state restore again, but this time a tad bit differently. So load state c:\\l. All right, and then /c, but this time I'm going to also include v:13, right? If you don't include the verbosity switch at a level of 13, then we will just totally ignore that environment variable. You won't have any files created, any XML files created to track things at all, right? So this one's not going to generate much because I'm not really doing much in this USMT state restore and such, but I'll run it anyway. And of course, I got it wrong again somehow. Load state c/l. I think I have it right now. Nope, still. Oh, hang on. I need to change directories, don't I? There. Let's find it now. There we go. Off we go. Now it's running. So notice that this file is now created. It's not going to have much in it, but it will contain the entire process. It works in scan state. It works in load state. Right. So don't need to follow that. It's just going to do its thing. So we'll go ahead and pull the lab out of the environment and just continue. Now, so all of that is default USMT. That's how it works, right? That's the way that you can drive it manually. The way that you can impact it through ConfigMgr if you want to add command line options and that kind of thing. What about customizing? So do you need to customize, or is default fine? Well, that's up to you, right? Default is fine for a number of folks. Well, you could have a couple of situations, though, that you need to do different from default. You could have some things included in default that you frankly don't want in default, and you want to not have those considered when we run the data gather and the data restore. Or it could be that there's something that you need to include that is not included in the default. Either way, we have options for you. So there's a config.xml file. The config.xml is specifically to selectively exclude migration settings, certain ones that you don't want that are in the default. Custom XML is a truly custom XML file to define things that you don't have and you need to track, maybe a homegrown application as an example. So the question is, how do we obtain these files? Well, the config XML is easy to grab. Let me pull the lab back in and we'll do it real quick. Right? To get the config XML, you do a scan state, but this time you're not going to specify a store. You're just going to use genconfig. Did I type that right? Genconfig : and the path to the file. So I'm going to call it c:\config.xml. And then also I'm going to want to specify the files that I'm having in the base. So migapps or migapp.xml, migdocs. Okay, and as soon as we do that, we'll be able to run this, hopefully. Okay, so again, I'm the master of... oh, I thought I had a typo. Sorry, I just didn't see it right. So we're creating this, so you see in just a minute when we're done that we're going to have a config XML that we can look at. So I'll pause this and come back when it's done. Okay, good enough. So we're finished, and the config XML was created. So I don't, after all the resetting, I don't have Notepad 2 here, so I will just open it with Notepad. And we'll see really quick that we list out all of the settings. This is not a definition of what to get. This is kind of an overlay of what we don't want. Right? So we can say yes, we can say no, whatever we want. Just scroll through this. Right? It's right here. So again, just to underscore, don't change the default migration files. If you need to customize and exclude files from the default, do it with the config XML. If you want to do a fully custom file, then you can do that as well. Right? But that's going to require having a custom XML, and frankly, don't have the time here or bandwidth totally to get through doing one of those. So I'll point you to two documents instead. This first document is one that discusses both of them and details what they are, right? The config XML, the custom XML. Well, and in the second one, we'll specifically go through how to build a custom XML. So if I go up here, paste that in, then here's how to create a custom XML. We can go down and see step by step exactly how to do it. Right? So if that's of interest, if that's needed, then it's definitely possible. Okay. All right, so let's pull the lab back out. So what about scenarios? So we've talked all about how it works. What about various scenarios? And these are just a few that I came up with. Certainly this is not an exhaustive list, but I want to talk about it, right? So where are we going to store the migration store? We talked about that a bit already. Do we store it locally? You know, what are the implications of that? Do we do standard creation and storage and you know, not do hard linking, or do we do hard linking, or do we do network storage? Right? Do we use the volume shadow service to create the store? What implications are there? And so on. Right? How are we going to secure the migration store? Are we going to encrypt it? The answer is you should. But if we are, what key are we going to use? What scenarios? How are we going to protect it? Again, is it going to be on the local disk where it's more vulnerable possibly to disk failure or someone grabbing the file or whatever? Or are we going to put it on a network share and secure it with our store, with our encryption key? Right? Are we going to use load state immediately, or are we going to have some delay, right? That's an interesting question. So in some scenarios, folks have run scan state to grab their data, but run load state a week or maybe a couple of weeks later to restore that data. It's an interesting option. If it's something that makes sense in your environment, definitely consider it. What are the downsides? The downsides are if you have an older migration store and there's been additions to the system since then, we're not going to know about them. We're not going to carry them forward, right? So, but one scenario that I know about, customer had some remote offices, decided to tell the users on this date, you need to make sure your machine is exactly like you want it before you leave the office, and then we're going to grab it, right? And any changes you make between now and when we actually change you over to the new OS, maybe a week or so, we're not going to get. So just be aware of that. You're responsible for those yourself. That worked out well for them, right? So it is possible. There's no expiration date on the migration store, So you can have that separation if you would like. Are you going to let users run this? It's very easy to put it out in a mail, put a link out there that runs a file, put it on a web page, that kind of thing. You could do that, right? Is that something that makes sense? And there are more scenarios we could talk about than these, for sure. And then finally, as we kind of wrap up this discussion, looking forward to ConfigMgr, just a reminder, ConfigMgr OSD does USMT. It does it very well. It does it in a predefined way. You can definitely have control over what USMT settings are in ConfigMgr. That's why I wanted to lay the groundwork here, so that whenever we do that next time, it will make more sense. And so on, right? ConfigMgr, again, is just a reminder. All we do in many cases is automate what you could do manually, right? We're going to spend a lot more time on that in the next session. This lays the groundwork. When we get to the next session, we'll actually show it in ConfigMgr, because that is the goal of these sessions, is to talk about ConfigMgr. So we will wrap it here, and we will see you in session 10 where we talk about that.